This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
At least 10 people killed by motorbike raiders in western Niger. The UN says northeast Nigeria insurgency has killed almost 350,000 people. And child soldiers carried out mass killings in Burkina Faso's Solhal village. Welcome to Africa Live on CGTN with me, Beatrice Marshall, in Nairobi. Also coming up on the program. In business, Nigerian lawmakers race to pass a long-awaited legislation to reform the petroleum industry. And coming up in your sports, the WRC Safari Rally revs off in Nairobi before a Friday action. And we begin the broadcast in Niger, where at least 10 people have been killed in an attack by suspected jihadists in the western part of the country. Officials in Tillaberi province say the insurgents used motorbikes to carry out raids on two villages, namely Dangazwani and Korombara. Grain stores and huts have been reportedly burnt down. Tillaberi is located in the tri-border zone linking Niger, Burkina Faso and Mali, a notoriously insecure area. Hundreds have been killed and thousands displaced across the Sahel region by the continuing attacks by jihadist factions. Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso, the government and the UN say that a massacre in which 130 people were killed earlier this month was carried out mostly by child soldiers. According to government spokesman Useni Tambura, the child soldiers involved in that attack were between the ages of 12 and 14. On the evening of June the 4th, the armed assailants are reported to have raided the village of Solhan, where they set homes on fire and shot residents. UNICEF has, in a statement, reiterated its condemnation of the recruitment of children as fighters. Well, let's get more on this development, and I'm joined by Nadia Adam, a researcher at Shez Institute for Security Studies based in Bamako in Mali. Thank you for joining us on the program. So what does this revelation say about children radicalization and conflict trajectory in the Sahel region?
This is a rather new trend in the Sahel. Most of the attacks were perpetrated by adults. And this indicates that the combatant profiles are also getting younger. And there is a better endogenization of the phenomenon, which connects to a contextual dynamic specific to this part of Africa. The fact that the combatants are this young is a worrying trend in the Sahel, where the youth are in higher numbers. And this radicalization becomes easier around particular socioeconomic vulnerabilities. This segment of the population does not always have access to education and generally constitutes a target of recruitment for violent extremist groups. We've seen that most of the schools in these regions where the insecurity is rampant have been closed, and it is an aggravating factor in a context where the educational offer was already insufficient. And it puts the children at risk of being recruited by violent extremist groups. And it is also part of the strategy of groups. A recent study by the ISS on the role of women in violent extremist groups argue that women are responsible for breeding the next generation of combatants to ensure the sustainability of the groups.
Right, Nadia, so are there any similar attacks involving children elsewhere in Africa? And what exactly are the drivers of this?
Well, this is highly possible. The issue of child soldiers has been at the heart of civil wars in Africa, starting from the year 2000. We've seen this in Liberia. We've also seen this in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And the logic of recruiting these children continued with the insurgencies of Boko Haram in Nigeria. And this tendency towards the use of children is therefore due to the failure of public policies in terms of education, employment for the parents, and better care. In some of these children and young people see the offer of violence as an opportunistic strategy for social advancement. And when we talk about children recruited and used by Boko Haram, for example, we're referring to orphans, children separated from their parents, and children of Boko Haram members as well. And around the year 2012 and 2013, when the group was getting to its peak, it had field days abducting children, as we remember the Chibok attack on high school students.
So Nadia, what is the likelihood that the insurgency will be defeated through military means?
The military response, although necessary, is not always sufficient. Sahelian states should move from what has been an all-too-reactive mode of operation to one that invests more in anticipation and prevention. And prevention needs to be both operational and structural, addressing the root causes of violence. These factors include frustrations over issues like land, administration, access to natural resources, and inclusion in decision-making. And most importantly, protecting civilians must become a strategic priority underpinning the action of national and international defense and security forces on the ground. The effectiveness of their work should no longer be assessed exclusively through the numbers of terrorists neutralized, but on the number of villages rescued and civilian lives saved. As we've seen, the attacks in villages are increasing.
Nadia Adam joining us there from Bamako in Mali. Thank you. Well, let's return to our headline story where at least 10 people have been killed in an attack by suspected jihadists in the western part of Niger. Officials in Tillaberi province say the insurgents used motorbikes to carry out raids on two villages, namely Dangazwani and Korombara. Well, let's now go to Deji Badmos. He's joining us live from Lagos with more on that. He has an update for us. Deji, what more can you tell us about this attack?
Well, Beatrice, this attack happened, the attack happened in an area that is notorious for attacks of that nature. It's not the very first time that jihadists will be carrying out such attacks in that province now. It actually happened at a place called Kiwindi district in, of course, the Tillaberi region, province now. Now, that area, I should let you know, is also witnessed an attack in January where about 100 persons were killed. The attack was carried out in a similar fashion. The attackers came on motorbikes and started shooting people. So January, 100 persons died. It's also that area that about 4 U.S. military forces were actually killed sometime in 2017 now, if you recall. So the area is actually notorious for jihadist activities. And the Tillaberi region itself, everyone knows, is a notorious region. You have quite a number of different jihadist groups now operating in that region. In this case, they were killed in 2 villages that you mentioned, and we understand they also went into the field killing people, and they burnt houses, burnt huts, burnt shops, and all of that. So the Nigerian government, of course, says it's on top of the situation, that it's going to send its military forces to go after the attackers. But, you know, it's something we've heard all the time, and at the end of the day, nobody gets arrested. The culprits are never caught or brought to book. So it's something that we've seen in that region and has become quite frequent, Beatrice.
Right, Deji, there has been a rise in attacks in that region recently. What is the cause for this?
Well, it's very simple. The truth is that whether we like it or not, Africa is becoming the center of gravity of the Islamic State as they moved away from Iraq and Syria. They're coming down to Africa. And with what you have in Libya, the instability in Libya, you know, attracted quite a number of them. Now we're beginning to see some semblance of stability in Libya. Now what is happening is that these jihadists are coming down towards the Sahel, and that's why we've seen increasing attacks in the Sahel. And unfortunately, we're talking about the Sahel now, where you don't just have the Islamic State, you have Al-Qaeda operating in the Sahel as well. You have quite a number of some unknown jihadist groups now. When you add that to the issue of communal violence in the Sahel as a whole, then that basically is the reason why we're seeing these increasing attacks. And unfortunately, you also have a situation where the militaries of this region are really not up to the task. The G5 Sahel force, not up to the task. You come to Nigeria, the military is still struggling to deal with Boko Haram and ISWAP. So the fact is that these jihadists are gaining influence in the region. They are expanding their territory, so to speak, and we continue to see attacks of this nature go up. Unfortunately, the response of the security forces has actually not been up to it. Beatrice?
Deji Badmus joining us there from Lagos. Thank you. Meanwhile, a report presented to the UN Security Council on Monday by UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says more than 8,500 children were used as soldiers last year, with almost 2,700 in Africa. Most of the violations against children were committed in Somalia and the Democratic Republic of Congo. CGTN's Robert Nagila takes a closer look at the situation in Africa.
The annual report on children in armed conflict covers the period from January to December 2020. In Somalia, which had the most violations against children on the continent, the UN says more than 1,700 children were recruited and used in the ongoing conflict by Somali terror group Al-Shabaab, government and regional forces. It was followed by the Democratic Republic of Congo, where close to 800 children were recruited by various armed groups. In the Central African Republic, close to 600 children were recruited and used by ex-Seleka armed factions. Next was Mali, where some 284 children were recruited by armed groups. Meanwhile, in South Sudan, 62 children were recruited by the Sudan People's Liberation Movement in opposition and the South Sudan People's Defense Forces. While in Darfur in neighboring Sudan, 13 children were recruited by the Sudan Liberation Movement Transitional Council and the Justice and Equality factions. The report goes on to say 4 children were recruited in Burkina Faso by unidentified actors, while 15 were recruited in Cameroon by Boko Haram-affiliated groups. In the Lake Chad Basin, 73 children were recruited by Boko Haram and splinter groups. And finally, 7 children were verified as recruited and used by Boko Haram-affiliated and splinter groups in Nigeria. The UN chief has called on the Security Council to ensure child protection provisions and capacity are included in relevant mandates of UN peacekeeping operations. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, moving to China, where the country has released a new white paper detailing how the Communist Party works with other political parties to improve governance. The document says China's system of multi-party cooperation and political consultation under the leadership of the CPC is a basic element of the country's framework. Shen Yuan has the latest from Friday's news briefing on the white paper in Beijing.
The cooperation between the Communist Party of China and other political parties is based on solidarity, democracy, and harmony. That's the message in a new white paper on China's political party system, as it details the country's unique system of multi-party cooperation and political consultation under the leadership of the CPC.
China is the world's most populous nation. In such a huge nation, if there's not a key leader to oversee and coordinate, it won't be able to come together like a pile of sand. So we say the leadership of the CPC is the essential characteristic of socialism with Chinese characteristics.
The white paper says members of non-CPC political parties and non-affiliates are key players, contributing and voicing their opinions in the nation's decision-making process. That includes drafting CPC-related documents, drafting and amending the constitution and laws, suggesting Chinese presidential nominees, and dealing with issues related to United Front work.
According to the white paper, political consultation means direct discussions on important decisions in both the drafting and implementation process. This comes with shared political goals among all parties. Non-affiliates participate in such consultations as well.
The consultations with members of the non-CPC political parties take place in three forms: forums, talks, and written consultations. When asked if these are effective, officials say the system embodies the interests of the widest range of social groups, guaranteeing effective state governance.
China will continue to learn from the achievements in human, political, and cultural society, but will not copy and borrow others' political system directly. We won't impose China's political system on others. China is willing to share and respect others for their choice of political system, based on the principles of equal and mutual respect.
Officials say China does not have any opposition party, but all sides rather work together to contribute to the development of the nation. Chen Ziyuan, CGTN, Beijing.
In the United States, President Joe Biden has approved an emergency declaration in the state of Florida after a deadly building collapse near Miami. President Biden also ordered federal assistance to supplement state and local response efforts. The collapse happened overnight while people were sleeping, trapping residents in piles of concrete, rubble, and twisted metal. At least one person was killed and almost 100 remain missing. Nitza Soledad Perez has more from Florida.
The night has fallen in Sunrise, Florida, and still dozens of people remain unaccounted for. Rescue operations will continue overnight after the 12-story building collapsed Thursday at 2 in the morning. As of Thursday night, 37 people had been rescued, 2 of them pulled from the rubble. Rescuers say they have detected sounds coming from the rubble and believe them to be sounds of banging. Locals and authorities are not losing hope.
Our firefighters, men and women, are working around the clock. A huge task force of people that are continuing. They're right now working. They're going to work all through the night. The dogs, they're working in the garage. They're working on the top, so they're visible right now. But they are proceeding with all of their might.
It's been a very challenging day for these rescue teams. First it was nonstop rain, then a fire broke. But they're trying to stabilize certain areas to continue the search efforts. In the meantime, families are posting on social media pictures of their missing loved ones and the units they were in, asking for information while their agony continues. Why did this building collapse is still unknown. What we do know is that this building was undergoing its 40-year structural recertification and that the roof was being repaired. Authorities are still looking for answers. Nitza Soledad Perez, CGTN, Sunrise, Florida.
You're watching Africa Live, still ahead on the program. Uganda to close parliament for 2 weeks following COVID-19 infections among the legislature. And South Africa's Cape Town is racing against time to vaccinate its residents.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Juba, Johannesburg,
Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Uganda is to close its parliament for 2 weeks as the country battles to control the spread of COVID-19. Parliament authorities say more than 100 of its staff, including members of parliament, tested positive for the coronavirus. Here is CGTN's Michael Baleke with the details.
A statement released by Parliament indicates that 14 legislators tested positive for the virus, but all the cases did not show any signs and symptoms that require hospitalization. The Parliament Communications Office says the closure of the Parliament House for 2 weeks is a precautionary measure taken for the safety of everyone. More than 1,000 people congregate at Parliament daily, and they believe the area could easily become a hotspot. Meanwhile, the Ministry of Health has handed out more than 5,000 mosquito nets to market vendors to protect them from a possible malaria outbreak. Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni recently ordered for a countrywide shutdown to control the spread of the COVID-19 infections. But food markets were allowed to operate on condition that traders do not go home.
During COVID, mosquitoes are not locked down. They are not in a quarantine. In fact, there is even more transmission because people are at home. Fortunately, this wave came when we moved around and gave mosquito nets for all homes in Uganda. But what we have also done, our village health team and community health workers, because people cannot drive to facilities, we have armed them with treatment and we have given them PPE to be able to treat people within communities.
Uganda is battling a more aggressive second wave of the COVID-19 pandemic. The country is recording about 1,000 new cases per day. Health officials have warned of more deaths due to limited hospital beds and decreasing oxygen supplies. Michael Baleke, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
The South African city of Cape Town is leading the race to vaccinate its residents against COVID-19. The urban hub relies heavily on international tourism and has been severely hit during the prolonged lockdown. It is now on a mission to vaccinate as many people as possible in the shortest time by setting up mass centers, one of them at the well-renowned Cape Town International Convention Center. But that, of course, depends on how quickly South Africa can procure jabs. CGTN's Julie Shire reports.
Cape Town's tourism industry was severely affected by travel bans on overseas visitors, putting many livelihoods at risk. The city is eager to ramp up its vaccine program and kickstart the economy as South Africa battles a vicious third wave.
So tourism is in fact one of the major economies of Cape Town and of the Western Cape. And we really want to assure people that we have systems in place to maintain our vaccination program, to make sure that the Western Cape at least can be a safe destination for tourists.
The Cape Town International Convention Center, once a premier destination for global gatherings like the World Economic Forum and the mining Indaba, have become an important tool in the city's arsenal. It served as a hospital of hope, treating COVID-19 patients at the height of the first wave.
It was the biggest field hospital on the African continent. We did it in 6 weeks. The Hospital of Hope was never totally overburdened. We never got to 100% of beds. But I mean, every now and again it climbed and we got a substantial, load on the hospital. But over time, thousands of people went through that hospital.
The convention center is now earmarked as one of the new mass vaccination centers in the city.
We currently have around 213 sites around the province. We can do roughly at the moment 70,000 vaccinations per week, but we have, as the health department in the Western Cape, we definitely have the capacity to step that up. This will be even more so once we open the mass vaccination sites that we're planning. One at the Convention Centre in Cape Town and one at the Athlone Stadium.
The city of Cape Town is hoping to significantly boost vaccinations as more jabs roll in. It's hoping to administer at least 4,000 daily at this site alone.
I'm also asking that we've got the capability to even run 24/7, although it's not going to be 24/7 in the beginning. It's going to be probably a 12-hour-a-day operation. And you'll be able to drive into the parking area. You'll be able to walk in off the street as well. And we're busy designing how it's going to be safely managed.
The race is now on to boost vaccinations. The vaccine program hit several snags. Just over 2.3 million jabs have so far been administered. It all depends now on how fast more vaccines will arrive to protect the rest of the 60 million strong population. Julie Shara, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
Mauritius has introduced new COVID-19 regulations which come into effect earlier this week. Under the Mauritius Quarantine Act, unvaccinated individuals who are over the age of 18 will be prohibited access to all education and medical facilities. If all goes well in the country's vaccination drive, most students will be able to return to school on the 5th of July. Here is CGTN's Liu Feifei with more details.
Mauritius is recognized as a best practice model for COVID-19 response in Africa and worldwide. Now, the country is gearing up for the next phase of opening up through the new requirement that all adults need to be vaccinated in order to have access to educational and medical facilities.
Now, the opening of the school is shortly, and with this regulation in place, now already more than 90% of the personnel having been vaccinated. So that means that our children will be able to go to school safely.
This is welcome news for students, parents, and educators alike. Since early March, all schools have remained closed due to a second wave of COVID-19 transmissions.
So the idea behind this legislation is to ensure that our children in school are protected and the school personnel also is protected, because we must not forget that for the educator, that person is exposed to 30 students at a time, and each time he goes into a new class, he's still exposed.
Similar to other places in the world, there are those in Mauritius who are hesitant to get vaccinated for various reasons. They can get around the vaccination requirement by either presenting a doctor's certificate stating they can't get vaccinated for medical reasons, or a negative PCR test result dating back no longer than 7 days. But for most Mauritians, they're grateful that on a continent where vaccinations are scarce, they have the chance to get the jab.
I just turned 18 in April, and as soon as I turned 18, I made it my priority to do the vaccination here. And I think it's very important to do the vaccination, as doing so will help keep me safe as well as everyone around me.
While the rate of vaccination across Africa currently stands at just 1%, Mauritius is making steady progress towards its target of vaccinating 60% of the population by the end of September. And no doubt, these new regulations are going to contribute to hitting that target, making Mauritius a true beacon of hope for the continent's fight against COVID-19. Liu Feifei, CGTN, Mocha, Mauritius. The China-Africa Institute has held the 8th Ambassador Lecture Zambia. The program aims to deeply cherish the memory of the founding president of Zambia, Kenneth David Kaunda. Kaunda was the founder of China and Zambia's friendship. The Zambian ambassador to China, Winnie Chibesakunda, says President Kaunda's positive contributions to the Zambia-China relations will be deeply remembered by future generations. President Kaunda remained committed to building a closer community with a shared future for mankind, insisting on the premise of mutual trust and mutual respect, and fully supporting and promoting the development of all-weather Zambia-China friendship. Chibesakunda says Zambia will follow the path pioneered by President Kaunda, continue to expand cooperation with China. The Chinese Communist Party is celebrating 100 years since it was founded in Shanghai. President Xi Jinping says his country has achieved the miracle of eradicating extreme poverty. Over an 8-year period, nearly 100 million people have been lifted out of poverty. Experts in Côte d'Ivoire and Senegal have praised the Chinese government for achieving this milestone.
La Chine d'abord s'est mis résolument au travail.
First, China has worked and beaten famine. Second, it has made its mark on technology. And with an estimated population of more than 1 billion people, China has managed to give employment to hundreds of millions of Chinese. I think that when the Chinese president says that China has eradicated poverty, it is a way to send a message to Africans that it is possible to start from nothing and become very powerful later. China is a model for Africans today.
La Chine aujourd'hui est un modèle d'exemple.
Several factors can explain China's efforts to win the war against poverty. In my opinion, the first factor is China's will, self-sacrifice and perseverance in this struggle. The second factor I can mention is the productivity and creative spirit of the Chinese. To this end, I can say that China has been able to invest in income-generating activities that contribute to the development of any country, and thus to the fight against poverty. The Chinese model is very inspiring and can be used by African countries. It is a model that is based on sharing and mutual benefit. I think this development model is also a builder of world peace.
Let's now take a look at your business news. Here's what's ahead. Nigerian lawmakers race to pass long-awaited legislation to reform the petroleum industry. And Tunisia mulls decriminalizing buying cryptocurrencies.
Taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Over the last 14 hours of rain.
Well, let's go to the continent's biggest oil and gas producer. Nigerian lawmakers are racing to pass long-delayed legislation which aim to overhaul the country's petroleum industry before the current parliamentary session ends in mid-July. The oil bill was first presented by the National Assembly in 2008. It intends to overhaul how energy projects in Nigeria are run and funded. Wrangling between politicians and objections from oil companies have torpedoed previous versions of the petroleum industry bill. A joint committee of the Senate and House of Representatives is currently looking at the final draft of the bill. Committee members aim to submit the bill to their colleagues for adoption before they go on a break on the 16th of July. Lawmakers will be back on duty from that break on the 6th of September. The European Union plans to sign an economic partnership agreement with Kenya, leaving out other East African countries which have so far failed to ratify the trade deal. The 27-member trade bloc will first sign the agreement with Kenya as other EAC countries wait for ratification. Negotiations on the EPA agreement were concluded 7 years ago, but it never went into effect due to a lack of approval from other EAC member states. Kenya has already signed the regional EPA and ratified it. Kenya and Rwanda were the only countries in the region to sign the EPA in 2016 after Tanzania, Uganda and Burundi refused to endorse it, forcing Nairobi to set up a temporary arrangement with the EU to give it goods duty-free access to the vast market. Tunisia is one of the latest countries seeking to change its rules on cryptocurrencies. Authorities in the North African state say they are closely following developments in blockchain technology and they plan to decriminalize owning cryptocurrencies. The proposed legislative change comes after local media reported that some young citizens were arrested in April for using cryptocurrency in an online transaction. From Tunis, here is CGTN's Adnan Echauchi.
The governor of the Central Bank of Tunisia has criticized the arrest of 2 young men for using cryptocurrency for online transactions.
Tunisian youth are very creative in fintech and startups. They can create an alternative and successful economy. They need and deserve our support. We should not only talk about the vulnerability of our economy, but also about new opportunities.
The country's ICT minister said the government does not plan to restrain cryptocurrency trading and mining and is keen to provide regulatory clarity for crypto adoption.
It is unacceptable to imprison people for using Bitcoin and digital currencies. The technology is developing, and our role is to adapt our financial system and guarantee its safety.
Tunisia's foreign exchange legislation dates back to 1976. It bans and criminalizes the use of foreign currencies without a formal authorization from the central bank. However, this law does not apply to cryptocurrencies. Analysts say a clear policy would augur well for the crypto community in Tunisia.
Cryptocurrencies are not stable, but they are an alternative way of making business, creating opportunities and investments for entrepreneurs. Tunisia will keep on using local currencies. Meanwhile, authorizing cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and digital currencies requires the adoption of new law. The old legislation is irrelevant. This will spare investors jail.
Several members of parliament have denounced the government's cryptocurrency mining crackdown. Some MPs say the finance committee is willing to decriminalize buying and mining cryptocurrencies.
It's unacceptable to arrest and jail talented Tunisians for owning Bitcoin and mining crypto. This is a scandal. The parliament will push and lobby for the adoption of a new legislation. We cannot work in 2021 with the tools and laws for the previous century. Let's encourage our youths to be creative and innovative.
Even without regulatory clarity, crypto adoption in Tunisia is growing at a record pace. According to a report from Carthage, an English-language Tunisian publication, Tunisian user registrations on crypto exchanges are up 11% in the first quarter of 2021 compared to last year.
Tunisia's Minister of Economy declared that he wants to change the law around cryptocurrencies, which condemns people for mining cryptos and using them as payment. However, some advisors to the Prime Minister warned that speculation was a threat to the country's financial system. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
The owners and insurers of the giant cargo ship that blocked the Suez Canal in March say they have reached an agreement in principle with the Canal Authority. This initial agreement comes after 3 months of continuous negotiations. Egypt earlier asked for more than $900 million in reward for dislodging the ship without any harm to its body. The Ever Given grounding interrupted the world supply chain after it stood in the way of some 422 ships to cross the vital trade waterway.
The Ever Given, the ship that blocked the Suez Canal entirely for 6 days 3 months ago, could soon be released from Egyptian custody. Egyptian authorities say they've made an initial agreement with the ship's company over the compensation it will pay the Suez Canal for its successful rescue mission and to compensate for the loss in canal revenues it caused. Egypt has been seizing the ship and most of its crew since March 29. That is when it dislodged the Ever Given after freezing navigation completely in the canal. Negotiations with insurers and the ship's owner failed repeatedly during these 3 months. Initially, Egypt wanted more than $900 million for rescuing the vessel without damaging its body and saving its load of 18,500 containers. After the Japanese owner offered $150 million, the Suez Canal Authority decreased its aspired amount to $550 million. But that too was not acceptable for the cargo ship's negotiating team. Neither the Canal Authority nor the Ever Given representatives have officially announced the final bill. Negotiations to finalize the initial agreement will begin next week. The Ever Given could be finally free to head to its final destination in Europe once its owner makes a down payment to the Suez Canal Authority. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Consumer inflation in South Africa jumped to a 30-month high in May. According to Statistics South Africa, the rate rose by 5.2% year-on-year in May compared to 4.4% the month before. That was the highest inflation reading since November of 2018, driven up by transport, food and non-alcoholic beverages. From Johannesburg, here's CGTN's Sumitra Naidu.
It's the highest reading since November 2018, but it didn't come as a complete surprise. Some economists say the annual inflation rate came in line with expectations. That's because it's coming off a low base. Oil prices crashed this time last year as governments around the world imposed lockdowns, forcing businesses to close and restricting the movement of people. Everything measured in the basket of goods rose in May. Food and transport costs were the main drivers.
Food, we've had a couple of outliers as well, the tomato shortages and some of the fruit and veggie shortages and all the rain and everything else. I think one more thing that we just have to take into consideration is that the very low base from which we are coming.
While South Africans struggle to get back into work mode as the economy reopens, they also have to deal with the rising cost of living. Transport was the biggest driver in these latest inflation figures, and that's because petrol prices have gone up almost 42% since last year.
Food and non-alcoholic beverages came in 6.7% higher, while the cost of transport rose 15.3% year-on-year in May. Fuel costs went up 37% from 21% in April. Even the price of cooking oil rose significantly, up 8.5% since April, but 30% up since last year.
Everything is up, even like the taxes now. It's difficult to get to work or to wherever you're going because the transport has gone up, the petrol has gone up, so it's difficult to make the ends meet.
Pretty much everything has gone up these days, transport-wise, food cost and everything.
These days you can't do groceries with less than 2,000 rands, for an example, and you still have to pay other bills like rent. Electricity is expensive. It doesn't last long like in the olden days.
It's unlikely to get any easier as this number could push the Reserve Bank to hike rates. At 5.2%, the inflation rate has now gone beyond the midpoint of the bank's target band of 3 to 6%.
Need higher interest rates in South Africa to attract scarce capital, not just in the short term to support the currency, but also in the longer term to support the economic growth. I'm just hoping they might give us 2 or 3 more months of breathing room, especially for the consumer that we know is still under a lot of pressure.
The Reserve Bank cut rates by 300 basis points last year and said it would keep the rate low as long as inflation remained at a moderate level. With consumer inflation now over 5%, it's unlikely that the bank can delay a rate hike any longer. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Authorities in Egypt say that since mid-2018, the country has introduced more than 3.5 million housing units with natural gas. The North African state has allocated more than $700 million to economic activities, including supplying homes with natural gas and the replacement of vehicles to run on gas instead of diesel and gasoline. CGTN's Yasser Hakim has more on this report from Cairo.
Egypt's government has been working hard to replace butane gas cylinders with natural gas around the country. The North African state's latest gas discoveries in the Red Sea and East Mediterranean have allowed it to be self-sufficient, making natural gas a better option than fuel or butane.
The more we put natural gas in houses, the more we save in petroleum products and butane imports. This reduces state expenditure, reduces subsidies on energy, improves the state budget and cuts deficit. For citizens, using natural gas is cheaper than butane gas cylinders and cheaper than electricity. And finally, you are cutting on pollution because natural gas is cleaner than fuel, butane and oil.
According to Egypt's petroleum minister, 3.5 million units have benefited from the service since 2018, making a total of 11.5 million units operating on natural gas. To encourage Egyptians to transfer to natural gas, the government has subsidized the cost of setting up the gas pipelines at home, and payments are allowed for over 6 years. It's also offering discounts on monthly bills for commercial and industrial units.
The government is targeting to speed up the process and introduce natural gas to 1.2 million units per year so that most houses would have natural gas in about 3 years' time.
But there are logistical challenges, including reaching out to ill-equipped cities. The government has introduced mobile natural gas trucks that pump gas not just for cars, but for houses and factories in remote areas. The project is part of the government's drive for renewable energy to account for 42% of total energy sources by 2030. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
And we still have more news for you here on the program. Here's what's ahead. A Ghanaian painter exhibits his environmental work in Accra.
When I look at Kibera through my lens, I see the happiness, joy, kindness, and the togetherness of the people of Kibera.
I also love the power of social media because it has really played a very, very big role. We did videos, and those videos were sent through social media.
Nikikanyaga tu kwa koti, huwa nafeel kuna kitu natafuta na ng'ang'ana, yaani hata niwe mzuri kushinda na dada.
Nature without humans. That's the focus of a new exhibition in Accra by Ghanaian painter Boy Kwate. Through his paintings, Kwate says he hopes to shape conversations on the need to preserve the environment. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai brings us his story.
We're able to master the color wheel. And you know the color wheel.
Boy Kwate has been painting for nearly a decade. His latest works are now on show at Accra's National Museum of Science and Technology.
I use nature scenes to tell stories of humans. So their affection, their emotions, their life, their energies, you know. So for me, inspiration actually comes from us.
Under the theme, Nature Without Humans, Boy uses his paintings to reflect the coexistence between humans and their environment.
Somebody may say, are we causing more harm than good? For me, I don't know. My paintings may tell. So the question should be free. After this, I intend to achieve that. We should get, if the negative aspect is becoming more, let's work towards it. Let's work towards it by reducing it. And if the positive aspect is also becoming more, let's encourage it and let's make it happen.
This art exhibition is part of a larger project set to be launched next year, with video documentaries dealing with the contributions of humans to the environment. It aims to encourage discussion about what humans can do to sustain the environment. 14 paintings are on display at this exhibition. Boy says it takes him about 3 weeks to produce an artwork like this. So far, the exhibition is going down well.
When you look at each of these paintings, I like the use of colors, bold colors. I like the different concepts, and I pray that this exhibition will be the start for the bigger one that will happen in the next year or so.
This year, the International Environmental Day, they are looking at restoring the ecosystems. So this theme falls rightly in place. These works here talks about the environment, which falls under science. So I think it's the right place to be.
Boy Kwate wants to produce at least 30 artworks before he launches the final art exhibition next year. As he gets creative with his paintings, he hopes to showcase his works on a global stage. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
And your sports news coming up next. Here's what's ahead. The